back to the Ref Show. Do make every effort here to keep politics out of football, and you might think it's rather a dry debate. Should we as a country, should Britain stay in Europe, or should we withdraw from Europe? But it could have ramifications for the game we all love. So does coin throwing. Thought we'd seen the last of that 10, 20, 30 years ago. It was rife in the 60s. Two terrible incidents over the weekend. We'll talk about that with our panel. But before we do, with Keith Hackett and Brian Dean, FA Cup, Blackburn 1, West Ham 5. Nothing that happened here had an effect on the result, really, from a refereeing point of view. I wouldn't have thought. John Moss was in the middle, but there were 2 red cards in that game. So your judgment on those: Chris Taylor of Blackburn for 2 yellows and a straight red for Kouati of West Ham. What was your view?
I think on the first one, the 2 yellow scenario, the first yellow was never a yellow. I mean, it's a careless challenge. It's not prevented a promising attack. So why give a yellow? He was quick with the first yellow. That then exposes the player to the second yellow, which Moss gave him, and a red. So we saw a player dismissed, for me incorrectly, because the first one shouldn't have counted.
And the other one was denying a scoring opportunity.
You know, I mean, okay, it's a difficult decision for the referee because he's got to determine the criteria. Is he moving towards goal? But the real one here was the probability of controlling the ball. Can he gain possession, or is he going to gain possession? And the answer is no. Clearly, it's with the goalkeeper. So, again, John Moss had the time to think about it. In the process of blowing for the free kick, he's now got a chance to be able to run it through his mind, as referees are trained to do, and come up with the right decision. But he's absolutely wrong on this one. I suspect that West Ham will appeal, and then it's a lottery, isn't it?
As to see,
it goes to a lottery. Who's sitting on the panel and who understands the law fully? But if they want my advice, and that of Mark Elsie, we're at 1, and that is this player should not have received a red card.
Okay, we move on. Brian, bring you in on this one. You're no political expert, but we do have David Cameron trying very hard to keep Britain for his party in Europe. What would be the effect on football if we were to withdraw? Could it have an effect on us?
I don't think so. I think there are clubs abroad in Europe as we speak, say like Norway, for example, who aren't inside the inside the zone. So I don't think that it would have that much an effect. And I also think that because the Premier League is the richest league, I don't think they could afford to have any disparity between us and anybody else. It doesn't make financial sense.
Could there be an opportunity to be seized, if I'm not advocating that we withdraw, but if we did, would that open an avenue to get rid of these damn transfer windows? Just boot them out?
Well, I mean, I can remember, I'm old enough to remember when you didn't have these transfer windows, and what the transfer windows have done is they've bumped the market up basically, because you might have a team who's struggling in December who decide we want this player, we're going to pay an extra 5 million for him, and it distorts the market pretty quickly. I remember when you could buy players right up to March.
Third Thursday in March, transfer deadline.
Yeah, and I think as a result of that, it was more of a balanced view right through the season. You know, if you needed a player, then you went out and got him, but there wasn't all this speculation. It's like a frenzy that's whipped up by, agents, TV, media journalists, we have to get, something has to happen for this team in that short space of time.
But regardless of what happens with the European issue, FIFA could well get disbanded. In the view of many, it should be disbanded. Do you agree with that, but you two, that it should be?
Well, it's an organisation that's not been run very, very well over recent years. I think, obviously, we're fortunate that we come under UEFA as well, where I think that organisation is run extremely tightly. But having said that, I think there are regulations that have come in and been introduced into our game that don't help the game. I agree with Brian. I think that the transfer market, transfer window, is a feeding frenzy that sees money just being thrown around, and perhaps a lot of the TV money that Richard Scudamore has actually worked damned hard to secure. Everybody might think it's easy. It's not. I've seen him after the period of time that he's been in negotiation. he comes out probably aging a little bit, a bit more. And I think all that needs to bed in. I'm not against players moving around a free market coming in, but I do think we need to get some order into it. And you know, we've got clubs now that have got 45 players, 25 can only play, and they're going shifting out all over the place. And we're seeing clubs
It's
having
nonsense.
Well,
And
they've got
blocking the way for kids coming through from
I
academies
think
as
that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, I mean, you look at I saw an article in the paper, and it was I think Chelsea have got, I can't remember how many players, it's 30 players out on loan across Europe, and it's like you think to yourself, well, they've spent all these players producing them, but there's no place for them, and then they'll go out and buy the next big centre forward for 30 million again. So it just doesn't make sense.
Isn't there an opportunity for football if FIFA's disbanded? We start again. Can we not get rid of the nonsenses that are in the game? Can we not look forward to that in terms of the transfer window and go back to a sane market which is open most of the time?
I think that there are two areas. I think for that, there's certainly room to manoeuvre. I think, again, from a refereeing perspective, you know, I know they're going through a fundamental review of the laws in relation to making them tidier coming up, and maybe we'll discuss at a later time. But the reality is that I think there are some laws that have got overcomplicated, that become difficult for the public to understand, and we just need to move a little bit closer. I mean, and get consistency. You know, I think the handball law is easy, but then I see my colleagues, active colleagues now, creating a fiasco really, because in some they're arguing it's handball when it's clearly not, and the reverse.
Well, we had this on the show last week with Glenn Turner and Mark Halsey, who couldn't agree on what was handball. So we've got a problem there. Not with those individuals. The game's got a problem if we don't understand what handball is.
How can a player work in that environment if they themselves don't understand
Do
what
you
handball
understand
is?
it, Brian?
I'll be honest with you, it is starting to get quite complicated. I mean, even you look at the incident you might have talked about last week with the Tottenham penalty, and you think to yourself, I mean, how is that? How the guy doesn't even know where the ball is?
No.
You know, and then we'll have something.
It needs clarifying. But just finally for this week, but not finally in importance, coin throwing. Thought that had gone out of the game, Brian. Thought it was history.
You know, for me, I mean, the guy Brunt has actually gone up to his own fans.
This is Chris Brunt.
Chris Brunt.
Just to set the scene before you carry on, his team's beaten 3-1, quite badly at Reading, but he has the courage to go to his fans to acknowledge that they've been there. A coin gets thrown, hits him just below the eye.
So what happens next, right? Players stop going up to their fans. Okay, next we got this media. They'll be on media. Next there's a big disconnect. The players don't even value us. They don't want to come over and say anything to us. But you've had this coin throwing incident a few weeks before from your own fans. I mean, come on.
And there was also one, Chelsea supporters threw coins at Manchester City players who were celebrating their single goal in a 5-1
Lack of respect.
Yeah, I think this is an absolute no-no. You know, I mean, Chris Brunt has done an honourable thing by moving towards spectators who are clearly unhappy that they've lost the game, and he's almost apologetic for that, representing his team, because there are a lot of his teammates who went straight down the tunnel, as I understand it. And looking at the mark it made, an inch off his eye. So the player here could have been blinded. So my view is, how do we prevent it? We expect common sense, and hopefully the spectators that are stood around the person that's thrown the coin will identify that person, and he then gets a life ban.
You know what? You know what's going to happen if we're not careful? Start caging fans in again.
Oh, we can't have that.
But you know, I'm talking about but I'm talking about in Italy where they have like the glass, but it's just a complete nightmare.
And just where the relevance is for referees and match officials, clearly they're aware of this problem now. Any advice for them where this happens?
Yeah, I think that we always say to the referee in a controversial incident, don't move too close to the edge of the touchline. Stay clear of it, so at least the coin, if it's thrown, or whatever the object is that's thrown, is losing some of its pace, and therefore it's damaging aspect of that object There's got to be an awareness. I think for the assistant, you know, I can remember at Nottingham Forest years ago giving what was seen as a very dubious offside, not the first dubious decision I've given, and I finished up with about £6 or £7 in loose coins around me. A few hit me, but they didn't do any harm. And I kept them. I mean, before I left the field,
souvenirs.
I collect them.
Yeah, but let's stop it. Okay, thanks ever so much. I mean, the people who do this are really the loose change of society, and we could do without. Thanks ever so much, Brian and Keith. Thank you for your company. Keep those comments coming. We do appreciate it, and we'll let you know what happens re the FA and Keith's open letter to Greg Dyke, and we'll see you next week. Bye now. Bye.